Now, 8 o'clock, going to be going to the United Kingdom to speak with ShakaRa, freelance journalist, and he's going to be talking to us this morning about one of our own mothers on this Mother's Day, the first woman to be placed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted terrorist list. We're still trying to deal with that. We're still trying to come to terms with that latest move by the FBI against Assata Shakur. We still haven't even, among ourselves, haven't even strategized how, even as journalists, those who are in the public space, how we respond to or how we deal with this. The implications for us as journalists, especially those in commercial media, will be great and far-reaching. The ramifications will be even worse. In addition to that, for those who are organized in groups that are identified as freedom groups, African liberation groups. We celebrate African Liberation Day on the 25th of May. African Liberation Day itself might the ramifications. We just say what we're thinking, and we're thinking out a lot of this aloud, even while we try to make sense of what has happened. And you'll get a better sense of this as we talk with ShakaRa. We're standing by to speak with him. We're joining him live from the United Kingdom. He's been blogging as a freelance journalist and a teacher. He's been blogging about this latest move and what this means for the African liberation movement. My brother Shaka, Hotep,
Sister Anja, greetings and give thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on. And, I'm saying that as journalists, we're still trying to come to terms with what our response to this is going to be. And we know what our initial response is, and we know, that some of us have already taken to the airwaves, and you have been blogging about this in the social media. For those in the commercial media, it is even the ramifications. We can't even begin to think of what they are. But let us talk about this, my brother, because in your blog you talk about Assata being placed on a list that has names such as Osama bin Laden, or had at least. So the questions are coming in already. Who was Assata Shakur? Not a lot of people knew of her. We talk about her, at least play her recording here almost every Sunday morning, talking about freeing all political prisoners. Help us to understand who is Mama Assata Shakur.
Well, first of all, it's necessary to understand that Mama Assata is, you could say, a lifelong freedom fighter. She began organizing, in the liberation fight for African people in America in her teens as a student activist in universities and so on and so forth. She went on to join the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which is arguably the most prominent African organization that emerged in the United States of America following the assassination of Omowale Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And they were very much the vanguard for the Black Power movement in the United States of America. And also, she also went on to join the Black Liberation Army. And not only was she a member, she was a leading activist. She was a very prominent activist, in the United States of America at that particular moment in time, and also became a victim of the attempt to crush the Black Power movement in America, and the American government went to great lengths to crush the Black Power movement in America, and so Mama Assata herself, as a leading member, became a victim of this. But some of the things that she was involved in directly, the Black Panther Party used to run community surveillance programs, in terms of monitoring the police and fighting back against police brutality. The Black Panther Party, which is also a fact about the Black Panther Party that is not often promoted, is the fact that they used to have breakfast programs that used to feed poor African children before they went to school. They also had education programs. They were also trying to develop community health and welfare systems, so all these community self-reliant things that they were doing for the benefit of the African people in America, and that was really what the American government didn't want. And Mama Assata was instrumental in organizing these institutions. And
there is need, my brother, for us to also understand, as you're pointing out so well, that this was a party, the Black Panther Party. It was a political and a social vehicle. So that it was a party that also contested elections. And this is what has to be known, has to be told. And we're talking about Jim Crow America. We're talking about 1960s in the United States of America. And some of the principal players along with Assata Shakur would include people like who? Who are some of the others? The names that would be immediately recognizable in the Black Panther Party.
Indeed, we're talking about people like Huey P. Newton. We're talking about people like Bobby Seale. We're talking about people like Angela Davis. We're talking about people like Kwame Ture, who you mentioned earlier on in the program. We're talking about people like Fred Hampton. These were leading members of the Black Power movement at that particular time, you know, and so many others, you know, there's so many others. And what was important that was going on at that time as well is that a lot of the different organizations were linking up and trying to, you know, come under a unified body, have a united front in forwarding the African power agenda. You know,
how did Assata, Mama Assata Shakur, she came to be known, and I'm saying this was in a derogatory way, but we accept this as the mother hen of the African Liberation Army. Tell us about that period.
Well, I think she became known as that because of well, first of all, as I've already mentioned, you know, she was a leading activist. So she was one of the more prominent figures around at the time. The way I understand the mother hen thing is that it has a positive and a negative connotation. The negative aspect of it is that you're supposed to be overzealous, over fussy, you know, and a bit fanatical, basically, about what you're involved in. So that's why she got that particular name. But you know, she joined a number of organizations and was leading members of all of them, and was organizing from very, very young. So much of the energy around that time revolved around her. And other leading members, you know, and also they couldn't capture her. So whereas they were able to get to a number of other leading organizers, especially the males, capture them, kill them, or incarcerate them, they could never find anything on Assata Shakur that would make it that would stick. So they arrested her for bombing a police car. They couldn't charge her with anything. They tried to arrest. They accused her of planning a bank robbery and all kind of different things, and they just couldn't get to her. And so, you know, she became this unreachable, untouchable figure among the activists at that particular time. You know,
and one of the things that you've mentioned, and I think we probably can expand on a bit in this conversation. You talk about the social work of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party has been portrayed over time as this mad group of militants who don berets and black leather jackets and black jeans with weapons, you know, with magazines strapped across their shoulders. But this is what Hollywood has done to a political organization, a social and political organization that did so much and within the black community. Let us talk a little bit more about that. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, definitely. I mean, well, if you check the Black Panthers 10-point program, the first thing that was on their agenda is that we want freedom. We want the right to control our own destiny and govern our own communities. And so really that wasn't just about holding a gun and you know, standing up against the police. They had to find ways of you know, of solving the problems of the African community, the black community, without being hindered by the state, by the American government, by the police department. They just wanted the right to live, and that's what was going on. So and so they what's the word? They affirmed as citizens of America within that context their Second Amendment right to bear arms. That was it. They felt that the African community was under attack. Now this was not an offensive. You remember the party is called the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Not offense. This is not an offensive position. They realized that the African community in America was under attack, and so adopted means by which to defend themselves, and that's what was going on. But again, the main programs of the Black Panther Party were about the African community taking responsibility for solving its own problems. So I've mentioned education, I've mentioned feeding the community, and I've mentioned also they had education programs as well. And these things are things that Mama Assata was instrumental in organizing and implementing.
Yes. The party itself grew out of a southern civil rights movement that we've been talking about in the 1960s, along with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I think it's important to know this, that it's an amalgamation of a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the other civil rights movements of a time that came together and was not initially known as a Black Panther, but it's a logo that they used of the panther that it later became known as a Black Panther Party. But my brother, isn't it interesting that our sister Assata, who was very young at the time, became such a leader. Her personality to me is very, very interesting, because to be such a leader and a serious leader for African liberation against all odds, knowing what the dangers were, because around her others were dying, others were being lynched, strange fruits, others were dying. But she became a leader in this movement. Let us talk a little bit about how the program used by the FBI, which you have written a bit about, to quell the liberation movement in the 1960s in America. You talk about Cointelpro. Can we talk about that?
Yes. Well, Cointelpro is the abbreviated version of the long title, the Counterintelligence Program. And basically, this program was initiated by the American government using the FBI under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover. Now, a little bit about J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was who the American government used in order to frame Papa Garvey, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, for the mail fraud accusation. To get him deported from the United States of America. So this man has a very long history of trying to destroy African liberation movements. And basically the program, his directive to his FBI operatives following the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King was that we must stop the rise of a black messiah who can unify and electrify the masses of the black people. And so they basically said that they have to create, confusion, misdirection, and destruction among the movement in order to squash the movement. And so they instituted a number of means through which to do this. And one of them was to flood the black community with drugs and with guns.
My brother, Shaka, when our listeners, sorry to interrupt, but when our listeners hear this, the uninitiated, immediately you hear conspiracy theory go up. But this has been proven. This is not something that we're conspiring right here. That the FBI flooded the black community as a way of to undermine the efforts and to neutralize the black liberation movement in the United States. Flood the black communities with drugs, with hard drugs. This is proven. Definitely. Yes.
Definitely. When you take into consideration the assassination, if you would go as far as to kill somebody, you wouldn't think twice about flooding the community with guns and drugs. But it even goes beyond the bounds of America. There is evidence that suggests that the FBI and the CIA was involved in flooding Jamaica with guns and drugs,
of course,
using the political system, and also the African community in the UK.
Yes.
So these are things that they have gone around the world and done in the name of destroying the African liberation movement. So so in terms of the Cointelpro, they arrested a number of leading members of the Black liberation movement under false pretense. They created discord among Black liberation organizations by sending paid agents into the movement, to spy, report back, set bugging, tracking devices, and also, so a lot of the information they got was used in order to, for example, Fred Hampton, who was a leading member of the Black Panther Party, was murdered in his own home while sleeping in his bed with his pregnant partner. And the information that was used in order to orchestrate that particular attack was given to them by an agent that the FBI had sent into the Black Panther Party, who gave them the information about where Fred Hampton will be sleeping how many guards would be on the door when they reach the house, and all these kind of things. You know, so these people will go to great lengths to destroy African self-determination, you know?
And as a matter of fact, for those who the questions might be raised, and you talk about J. Edgar Hoover, his name is well known in terms of how Marcus Garvey, Mwalimu Marcus Mosiah Garvey was hounded. But as the FBI director at the time, in the 60s, I think in 1968 and onwards, labeled the Black Panther Party at that time as the most serious threat to internal security. Now, can you imagine that? What has changed? So to be labeled the most serious threat to internal security, and to be a leader in an organization for the liberation, for the freedom of a race within the United States. Can you imagine then what kind of pressures might have been faced by the members of that party, which, to remind our listeners, was a political party, organizing the vote? Can we talk about that, Shaka? Because this is part of what Assata Shakur and the others were doing, organizing black people to vote, as we see a lot of black people did for Barack Obama just recently. It was no different.
Indeed. Right. Indeed. The difference being, though, that when they organized to vote, they were organizing not just to look at candidates, right, and pick one to vote for. They were trying to put their own candidates on the ballot.
Of course.
So the leadership therefore came from the organizational effort. This was not an individual on an individual endeavor that African people were being asked to get behind, who we didn't know, had no idea about. This is a person who was there to fulfill the agenda of the African community on behalf of the African community. And that is the difference. That's the difference between Barack Obama and a Black Panther Party.
Of course, yes. And I'm talking about the way black people rallied and organized the vote. People were saying, get the vote out. So to make the connection between then and now, because it seems that there is this chasm between the 1960s and now that bridge that needs to be gapped, that is part of the miseducation of the African, that whole history has been, written out, and Hollywood and the media has taken over in terms of how we are represented to ourselves and what we have bought into. Since I spoke about Assata and Mama Assata last week, so many persons, educated and intelligent and intellectuals, have called to say, but she was a member of the Black Panther Party, wasn't she? You understand? So Black Panther now is like a bad word. Black Panther is a decent language. It is important for us to understand what the Black Panther Party was and what it came out of. That it came out of a civil rights movement, and the students nonviolent coordinating committee led by Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture. It's very, very interesting that we point that out. Let us talk now, though, about how Assata. Because here we have members being targeted. You talk about those who were killed and those imprisoned and so on. How was Assata herself? How did she end up in prison, tortured and so on? Tell us about that situation.
Yes, well, I've already spoken about the fact that they were hounding her, and they had her under surveillance for a number of years, and they were trying to pursue her, trying to frame her under some criminal activity or another. They couldn't find anything. And so in 1973, she was stopped along with two other brothers who were just driving, in New Jersey. And the result of this stop, they were stopped by the police, basically, for supposedly driving with a broken tail light. And an incident took place while they were being stopped, in which shots were fired, and one of the two police officers was killed, along with one of the brothers from the Black Liberation Army. And so basically they tried to frame Mama Assata and hold her responsible for having killed the police officer. They also actually tried to hold her responsible for having killed her own Black Liberation Army member as well at one point, but they dropped those charges. And what the police officer who was shot, Officer Forrester, was shot with his own gun. And so the story was that she reached into his belt, took out his gun and shot him while he was on the floor. But medical evidence revealed the fact that she had been shot herself twice in the back, whilst her hands were in the air, and that one of those shots broke a bone in her shoulder.
Broke her clavicle, and it was so bad that the doctors ruled that there's no way she could have held a gun, much less to reach, much less to reach for a gun. There was no. We heard last week in this space that there was no forensic evidence to support that she even fired a gun. But she was but she was tried for this, and we heard last week in this program. Of an officer who recanted that he saw her, because he said he saw it and he recanted. But so from there she ended up in prison. Yes.
And in her own words, she says that it was a hellish experience in which she was beaten and she was tortured and moved from this cell to that cell in maximum security units. She was in a cell guarded by snipers in 2 towers, that were, that had their guns aimed at her particular cell. And oftentimes she was kept in all men's prisons. And they used to, organize to beat her in these prisons, and to the point whereby her legal team and her family, had to basically, raise hell to get her moved out of certain prisons and into better conditions. And some of them say that when she was finally moved, and they made a point of, improving her condition, she was actually near death. The condition that they had left her in, they had reduced her to, and this is what she was going through while she was in jail.
And she was placed in an all-male prison. All-male prison.
Exactly.
It's a shock of it. I mean, the entire thing is shocking, but, when you think of that, I don't think most of us can even begin to imagine as a female what it means to have all male prison guards, but then at the same time, all male prison. She was in solitary confinement for 2 years.
Yes, exactly. And also became pregnant, and remained in that condition, and they beat her while she was pregnant. You know what I'm saying? So these people we're dealing with a very sick, and twisted set of individuals.
And now, my brother, Brother Shaka, we're hearing, so she's been placed now, and by the way, this happened on May 2, 1963, in the 60s. Anyway, we'll tell you 73. Sorry, 73.
Yeah.
All right. So, and she, and now, so many years after, 40 years after, she's been placed on the top 10 wanted terrorist list. What I like about your blogging, and now, so many years after, 40 years after, she's been placed on the top 10 wanted terrorist list. What I like about your blogging and the research that you've done for your piece is that you've gone to look at the list for terrorists, the FBI list, and how terrorism is defined, and what others who have been on the list, what they have been charged with. Talk to us about that, and then compare that to Mama Assata's situation.
Well, I was looking at the list itself, and who was on it, and the people that are on it are charged for some serious offences, like plotting or to kill U.S. citizens with weapons of mass destruction, things like that. And I compared it to what they had Mama Assata on there for, and it was nothing comparable. They had her on there for act, and it literally says act, not acts, plural, singular, act of terrorism, and flight.
Unlawful. I have your blog in front of me, so let me just read what you've written. You say it is interesting to note that while the others on the list feature for allegations such as conspiracy to place a destructive device aboard an aircraft, attempting to destroy and damage by means of explosives, and conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction against U.S. nationals, Mama Assata features for vague, undefined offences such as act of terrorism, as well as unlawful flight to avoid confinement / murder. Unlawful flight to avoid confinement / murder.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so from there now I looked at the definition of terrorism. Now there's various definitions of terrorism in the world. You have the dictionary definition, then you have the UN trying to create a definition. But because it was the FBI who labeled her a terrorist, the FBI definition of terrorism is what is germane to this particular issue. So I went to the FBI definition, and the FBI definition says that they define terrorism as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in the furtherance of a political or social objective. Yeah. So really now, so I have to look at that now. I'm saying to myself, well, how does what they have charged Mama Assata with fit that definition? Because it doesn't. Because flight in no circumstance, under no circumstance, can be considered force or violence. If you're a runway, you're not trying to force anybody to do anything, and you're certainly not being violent against anybody. Yeah. One could argue more often than not that if you are in flight, that you are fleeing somebody being violent or forceful towards you.
Yes.
Yeah. And even murder in and of itself cannot be considered terrorism.
And we are at pains, as you were in your blog, to say that we know she did not commit this murder. The evidence proved otherwise. But then they say murder, and there are a lot of murderers in the U.S. prisons who are not labeled terrorists. So what is different here? Yes, exactly.
And this is the question that needs to be that needs to be answered. You know, and the only difference is that what they have accused Mama Assata with murder as a woman who has stood up for the liberation of African people, you know, and so they have tried to put this particular case in that context. But she didn't pursue the police. The police were pursuing her. She was stopped by the police, so she didn't pursue the police with any agenda, any vendetta, or anything like that. You know, and it's proven that she had her hands up in the air, which, you know, when you have your hands up in the air, we all know what that means.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And one of the things that you have done in your article also, in terms of the research, is that you have connected this to taking it back to the Cointelpro program instituted by the FBI, and to say that the objectives of Cointelpro are still in this case at work. You talk about preventing the do you have the objectives there? You want to go through them for me, some of those that you have highlighted? Because one
No, yeah, so first of all, like I said, J. Edgar Hoover had outlined the prevention of the rise of a black messiah. So one of the things that he said was prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. Yeah. So that's not just the organization now, but prevent them from coming together. Yes. Yeah, under a united front. Prevent the rise of a black messiah who can unify and electrify the black nationalist movement. Yeah. And that's looking at the leadership now. Right. Those who are in leading positions.
Yes, and this is Malcolm, the Mwalimu. Yes, this is where Mwalimu Marcus Garvey.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that because they called Papa Garvey a black messiah. Yeah.
Yes.
Prevent black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability. Yeah. And by discrediting them to three separate segments of the community. They haven't defined that in what I was able to research, but that means basically to promote false propaganda about the leadership and the groups themselves. So you talked earlier about how Black Panther Party is now a bad word.
Yes.
That is because that is the result of Cointelpro.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, they promoted negative propaganda about the Black Liberation Movement and the leadership of the Revolution Movement.
So obviously one segment of the community immediately identifiable as us. As we, our own community, you know, prevent black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to three separate segments of a community. Immediately, we become one segment, and it has worked. Exactly.
Yes. And the final one here, which is in some ways particularly important, is a final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black organizations, especially among the youth. Specific tactics to prevent these groups from converting young people must be developed. And this is what is important about Mama Assata Shakur, because she was organizing from when she was very young.
Yes.
And I'm still in my 20s, yeah, and I take a lot of inspiration from that. And so really, they were specifically targeted, not just at those who were active at that particular moment in time, you know, although they were, because remember, the first person that the FBI killed, the police killed, as a member of the Black Panther Party was 16 years of age. Yeah, that's Bobby Hutton. Yeah, they killed a 16-year-old child who had joined the Black Panther Party, but they were concerned with killing the Black Power movement among the children of those who were organizing and were in their 20s and 30s at that particular moment in time.
Yes.
So we were not supposed to have another generation come up of activists, of freedom fighters, Yeah,
this is very important.
These activists. Exactly.
This is very important, Shaka. At this time, the final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black organizations, especially among youth. Specific tactics to prevent these groups from converting young people must be developed. We can say one of the tactics is to place Assata Shakur on the most wanted terrorist list, the top 10, the first woman to be there. And this morning I talked about that march on Selma that was reenacted the other day, that was mainly organized, as Angela Davis told us last week, by the grandchildren, the youth of the civil rights movement and the Black Liberation Army and the New Republic of Africa and so on. So this to me is it might be a knee jerk, it might be a response to, but obviously we see the objectives of Cointelpro in play today as Mama Assata Shakur is placed on the terrorist list.
Very much so. And all over the African world. When we look at things like AFRICOM, which is the U.S. military high command that is scheduled for the African.
Hold that point, my brother. Let me take a quick break. We're speaking with ShakaRa. He's in the UK. We're talking about the implications of Mama Assata Shakur being placed on the top 10 most wanted list, terrorist list in the United States on this Mother's Day. A quick break.
Informative. Change. The time is now and the place is here. Andrea Williams on Irie FM.
All right, we're back with you inside of the Irie FM forum. Just a few minutes before we get to the news and sports, we're speaking with ShakaRa, who is a freelance journalist in the UK. He's been blogging, writing seriously about the implications of the placing of Mama Assata Shakur on the FBI's top 10 most wanted terrorist list. Shaka, thanks for staying with us.
Yes, sister. Good time.
Yes. In the interest of time, because we have just a few minutes left, I wanted to talk to you quickly now about what you see as the implications of this. I like the way you wrote in your article that you went back to look at persons like Jeruba bin Wahad, Geronimo G. Jaga, Mutula Shakur, Afeni Shakur, and so on, Mumia Abu Jamal, and you say Mama Assata's case is you pinpoint where the differences in Mama Assata's case. Let us look at that briefly.
Yes, well, the major difference is that she broke out of prison. She planned to break free, and she broke free. Whereas many of we have a lot of political prisoners that still remain in prison in the United States of America, and so really she has conquered the system in a way that her example is not matched anywhere else, and that is dangerous because she disregarded their authority and broke out of their system and didn't wait to be exonerated. She just broke free, and so it shows it's an example to a lot of people in terms of how you deal with injustice when you know that you are being just, so she's a unique example. And a fantastic example in that regard,
What do you think the implications are for advocacy journalism? Because journalism for us has to be more than just reporting. We have to take a stance, even if we're sitting down. And that's not to say that we're throwing objectivity through the door, because objectivity is as objectivity does. It is a hallmark of what we do. But what does this mean for advocacy journalism, my brother, especially in commercial media?
Well, I think I listened to your bottom line about this a few weeks ago. When you were discussing this, and I agree 100% with what you were saying. I think as a journalist, for me, speaking the truth is far more important than whatever they call objectivity. The problem is that objectivity is defined in a way that it maintains the institutions of power that oppress us. And that is a problem. I have no worth writing as a journalist if I cannot speak truth to power in a way that empowers the people. And so really but what they have done now is made that type of journalism a terrorist act, incitement of terrorism, so to speak, because you cannot be for black power, because now they've defined black power as terrorist ideology. And so if you're a black power journalist, or you're a journalist that is sympathetic to black power, you can be accused of inciting terrorism, and that is what they have done. And you know, in terms of you know, employment, you're out of employment in that respect. You know what I'm saying? And so really, and then even if you go as far as to develop your own media institutions, you know, independently, your media institution is likely to be considered terrorist or leaning or sympathetic towards terrorism if it has too much of a pro-black African national, you know, sentiment expressed through its medium, you know.
And the ramifications, and I've moved from implications now to ramifications, because the ramifications are going to be, we have not seen it, and I'm quite sure that we're going to be feeling it sooner or later. But
exactly.
And for black and for activists for African liberation, I'm not quite sure if it was in your blog, because I've been reading so many of them, where I think it might have been you who talked about what does this mean for African Liberation Day celebrations? What does this mean for black liberation groups? Coalescing and coming together for continued African liberation. We hear Mama Assata, as you have said in your piece, has said, we are not yet free. And that is so, even as we see the African Union genuflexing to the European Union by strengthening trade ties there. How do we speak out of this? How do we organize ourselves without being seen, that being seen as an act of terrorism?
Exactly. Well, put it this way. Put it this way. When you consider the fact that the U.S. government, sends its armies to other people's countries with or without their permission in pursuit of terrorists, so that means that when Irie FM organizes a march in commemoration of Black Friday, like you did, a few weeks ago, and bring that many people, that a march that can be considered you know, terrorist activity, promoting a terrorist ideology. That's what it means. And so it gives the American government the right to meddle in the affairs of Jamaica, not just on a state level, but on a people level, on a social level, and send agents, and their army, and which they will do, because they have been proven to do it throughout history. That is the ramifications of it. And so it forces now, and we know, well, we understand how Jamaica has been made. The Jamaican government has turned Jamaican society into a satellite for America. So now they have to flex and dance and shuffle to the beat that America is playing. And so how the Jamaican government now begins to relate to its people, there's going to be ramifications there also, depending on how America itself views the activities of Africans in Jamaica. But you made a point earlier in terms of how Africans in the Caribbean relate to Africans in Africa. And this is a very, very important point, because we're seeing with the reparations movement that Africans are beginning to organize globally. And this is what they're scared of. This is what they're afraid of. When in the early 2000s, you had in Barbados the conference of Africans and Africans descendants against the World Conference of African and African descendants against racism. Try and know the powers that be, so quote unquote, took keen notice of the fact that Africans, thousands of Africans, traveled from all over the world to that conference. And so they are very, very scared of what also the incursions that China is making into Africa, and how that affects their power in Africa, and also most importantly, African self-determination. Because we have to understand that, as my father, Brother Leader Mbandaka, always says, whoever controls Africa rules the world. We're going to leave it.
Go ahead, my brother. Final sentence.
Yes, and African self-determination is the biggest threat to Euro-American power in today's world.
My brother, you're a young man. You sound as if you're an ancient who have returned. You say you're just in your 20s, and I know our listeners are thinking that you're 55. But as a youth in your 20s, you've really set the thing out for us properly this morning, and we want to thank you for that, for doing it so well, and for writing. The pen is mightier than the sword. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, sister.
All right.
Thank you for all your work.
All right. Our brother ShakaRa, freelance journalist, young freelance journalist based in the UK, looking at the thing, analyzing it, pulling it apart and writing about it. Time on Irie from 8:45. Natalie Campbell is standing by with the local and international